using art as therapy. And I'll explain that in a little more detail. But I've been doing it for about 12 years. And one of the things that's enhanced my work has been being at a place called Sheena's Place in Toronto, which is a warm and welcoming center for people who are affected by eating disorders. And anyway, what I love about art journaling, I brought one of mine here, is that really you're using a sketchbook that you are then going to create into a place where you can reveal to yourself your inner experience, and you can reveal it to others if you choose. And the interesting aspect of it is that you can revisit the journey you've been on by opening the pages and getting the messaging that's in there. Even if we don't verbalize it, there's still messaging there.
All right.
All right, thank you. I just wanted to thank all the participants that have been in my groups in the past. Some of the photos that are here. Many of them are also mine because I do a demonstration piece for people just for confidentiality, but it's kind of a nice thing to see your work. And also another art therapist that does a lot of work at Sheena's Place. Her name is Sonia Thursby, and she shared some of her research notes with me in order to put this all together. So thank you, Sonia.
Just one request, if you don't mind speaking up a little bit.
Okay.
I can also move the microphone for you.
If you push this button, see if you can switch the...
Mm-hmm. Okay, it should work from now on.
Oh, okay. Mm-hmm. So what I'm going to do is just define for everyone what art therapy is, and just go over a bit of the possible presenting challenges for someone with an eating disorder, because that's important for working with people, and why art journaling in particular, and some art journaling invitations that I use to address eating disorders. So let's get started. First of all, what the heck is this art therapy? Many people are intimidated by the idea that, well, I don't know how to draw or anything like that. The sort of formal definition is that it's a type of psychotherapy that uses art making and the relationship with an art therapist to improve the well-being of a person's whole self, physical, spiritual, mental, and emotional. So the art image becomes the other voice in the room. And because it's tangible, it's something that externalizes your inner experience and becomes a reference point. Art therapy is quite personal work, where the art as a companion allows the art therapist and the art creator to witness the journey together. But you can see from something like this, it may seem like all kinds of ominous things to you, but when you're in the room with the person, I guarantee you, whatever the take is very tangible. It's an energetic kind of exchange beyond just seeing a clinical image. People use art therapy when what you've experienced or are experiencing is hard to put into words, or when you want to examine your fears. This was a fierce young 11-year-old boy who had a big secret he was having a lot of difficulty dealing with. You can use it to lighten your heart. This woman, in one of my, when I was at the Gardner Museum doing art therapy groups there, she made that hand through a whole 2-hour session, and it was her grandmother's hand that she held during the days that her grandmother was passing away, and how very special and it was for her to revisit that in a tangible way by holding that hand again. And art therapy helps bring your attention to the present moment. If you're doing something like this is a left-hand, right-hand exercise where you're mirroring. The ability to worry is a little bit gone because you're so focused on creating that it gives you physical relief as well as emotional relief. So I want to tell you a little bit more about what an art journal is, because there are, of course, many ways to use sketchbooks or art, what are called art journals, but in my case, an art therapy art journal is not an artist's sketchbook, which can be somewhat intimidating, and because it doesn't matter what your art actually looks like, it's the process and the messaging for you. It's also not a scrapbook or a craft book with pretty pages and so on, so that you don't have to worry. If your pages don't look pretty, that's probably a good sign that you're diving in and thinking about things inside. And it's not something you need to show anyone. You know, once you've created your art, you can just close the book, and the cover provides the confidentiality that you might wish for as you go along. So why would someone want to art journal per se? Well, first of all, the art therapist supplies the space. It's got space that I mean in terms of a room or a place for you, but also the space to sit quietly and just be with yourself. How often do you actually give yourself those moments of self-reflection? There are boundaries that are set within the room and also within the group, so everyone feels confident that there's a lot of leeway, but there are limitations, and that provides safety. And by creating invitations, the art therapist is saying, here's an idea that I have that may help you explore, fill in the blank, and there's enough leeway that individuals can go along the path that suits them best. Art therapists are also your non-judgmental witness, which means that we are there for you, but we're not sitting with notes diagnosing in any way. We're allowing what comes forth to be from the deepest places you wish, always keeping in mind that there's safety involved and that you have the ability to do this without judgment. And then the art holds a marker for both the group members and the art therapist, so that when you're as you move along, and especially if it's a group that I usually run groups for 10 weeks, so by the 7th or 8th week, the group is feeling like they really know each other a little bit. They've had little vignettes of insight into one another and a lot of resonance about what is the same. The format that I use for art journaling in a group is first, we may discuss at the very beginning. I like to ask what brings you to the group and what might you like to discuss while we're here or to explore. So on any given week, I'll identify a presenting difficulty and then how that manifests in each person, and then we address that through group discussion. And then we use an art invitation to explore that topic. And then we reconvene for a discussion about the process, what our feelings were, and give each other feedback on what we see objectively. So coming from an I standpoint, understanding that the only real vision I'm seeing is through my own eyes and my own perspective, but it does give people some insight sometimes to their own journey. There are some real advantages to having a group with a population that has an eating disorder, primarily because, of course, food is a factor in most social gatherings, as you know, and that means that many, many people with eating disorders are very isolated because they just want to avoid times when there's food involved, and that's a lot. So this kind of group provides a community or some community when there is very little. It can provide the support, compassion for each other, but also self-compassion. And it provides a different kind of perspective when you are seeing art that, I mean, you don't think of it as art, but you're doing what I've asked and you're creating something and then you wonder about it. But as you see others, it starts to bring this perspective that, okay, so I see this is something different than the way I usually think. And that's a lovely outside to keep exploring. And also in the group, seeing each other, witnessing really each other's art, you have this opportunity to have this deeper understanding that the outside community can have a harder time grasping. Okay, so it's helpful to understand that there are some apparently common issues that may present in those with an eating disorder while they're art journaling. I'm going to go back to my notes here. Here we are. One of them is shame. People are worried that their inner experience or something from their past will show up in the art. I mean, it could be it's really as hard as wearing a bathing suit to imagine that something will be externalized. So there is that. There's a fear of being seen, that the art, many people might use the art to, in a sort of stylized way, as a kind of protection. So it's good to recognize that coming in, to understand that whatever's safe is fine. There's no requisite to go all the way sort of thing and really go deep. It's just that each time it's good to understand that each step is a brave, brave step. There's often a fear of making mistakes. I might get it wrong. There are no mistakes in this kind of art. Really, who can judge what someone else's inner experience is? So that makes it easier because if you can relax into the idea that there is no perfection involved, that can be lovely, which brings me to a need for perfection, because people certainly in this group are grappling with that all the time. But if you're using paint or oil pastels or glue and cutting things out, there comes a moment every week when you're doing art journaling where you realize that you cannot achieve the perfection that you were imagining in your mind. And in this way, the art allows an opportunity to let go of a need for perfect and also to examine what you think perfection is. So there are kind of two aspects that people with eating disorders tend to bring to the room. Either they have a deep aversion to mess, or conversely, a desire to immerse themselves in the materials. There's never, can we please have more and more and more, and it becomes a bit overwhelming. The same qualities of art journaling answer both aspects of this, because it can be overwhelming and triggering. But what happens is there's an ability, as I was saying before, is only so much page that you can cover. So the material quantity that you're using and the amount that you can show is limited. And then the cover closes and the process can continue. And it becomes that measure of privacy that helps alleviate some of the other symptoms that come up. The not good enough, not measuring up is invaluable to be in a group like this, because there's both the support of your peers and of the art therapist, but also many start to see that their perception is erroneous. One day they create something that surprises them, using materials in new ways, for instance, or to create abstract, self-centered creating leaves room for self-appreciation. Like, oh, yes, this is me, sort of a thing. Sometimes something in something you're creating triggers you. In that space is the potential for much learning if a person is ready. But if you're working with people, you have to understand not everyone's ready at that time. So in those instances, we pace ourselves depending on the situation to either perhaps push through it or walk over it, or perhaps start again. During the discussion at the end of each session, the art therapist is mindful of the words that people use, because the terms that are used free one's outlook, or at least begin to reframe by saying something in a little different way than "I never am able" or "I always do this." To point out, you could say, "At this time," or "Today, I did it this way." And it's just these times when you're aware that there is this depressive outlook of the world or of yourself that the art therapist or whoever is facilitating an art group can help people understand that this is just a passing thing. And it lightens that framework. So I'd like to show you some of the art journaling invitations that I use that illustrate how the work can foster self-awareness, self-efficacy, and healing. So one thing I want you to know is that I always ask people to date their artwork in their art journal, because it does help you to look back. And sometimes you're surprised that 6 months ago I did this, and now when I see it, it seems so different to me. I have a different perspective. It's a great measuring tool for a person. And this is a great beginning exercise. What I might do as in the beginning is I would ask them, why have you come to this group? And what would you like to get out of the 10 weeks that we're together? So we all write out the ideas, and then using that written list of ideas, we cut the paper into strips, and then we integrate them into a warp that we've created out of another piece of paper. And as you can see, there are many takes on what that weaving's like. The bigger picture with many angles has some of the words showing through the weavings. But the other two, the words are there, but the one piece of paper was turned upside down so that the words are there but within. And the other one, it's very intricately woven into a piece of origami paper. So by taking all the loose pieces and meaningful words and interweaving the paper, members access vulnerable feelings while maintaining defenses. Plus, they welcome everyone into their art. For this exercise, I bring in colorful work from the internet that celebrates small phrases. So they're already kind of a mini poster. And then again, we talk about the power of words and how, say, the ones that are chosen here are, you'll turn out normal if you're not careful, and everything's going to be all right. So it's many takes on that. And then what they do is they use old plastic cards and acrylic paint and create a background to complement the mini poster that they've chosen. Introducing a new color palette like this, because the posters are already very colorful, can be freeing and fun to explore. Even the usually black background participant, the one on the left, she was intent on proving that that might not be true, or based on her inner experience that couldn't possibly. And yet pink flowers started to appear, and she was surprised. And also a bit amazed. So experimenting with color to express emotions like anger and frustration affirms that images can be powerful self-expression. Let me see what the next one is. Yes. This can reduce anxiety about, you've got to get it right, and increase a sense of self-accomplishment and self-efficacy. Here again is showing that anger and frustration that feels so freeing when you put it out on paper. Something I really emphasize for art journalers is to be open to letting the inside out. And my favorite way to go about that is using something called energy sketches. So in this, it's abstract. It's really abstract for people to imagine considering their inner feelings as expressible through art. So this session, we talked about the essence of ourselves. Who is the one who says, my foot or my head, you know? So the activity was keeping in mind the essence of you and keeping your pen on the page. Scribble whatever you feel onto the page. And then we colored them in. Now this is an example of mine from years ago, but I had broken my ankle and I was sitting in a chair for approximately 6 weeks, for the most part, and keeping my foot up, and the scribble that came out was this, I felt it looks like a squawking parrot, and I started realizing that the message for me at that time was, speak up for yourself, Deb. You know, it's okay if you're a little bit squawky and have some needs that need meeting. So that was very helpful for me. You can see others here have done different energy sketches where, you know, they weren't sure where they were going with this, but it creates an opportunity to face that anxiety or negative outlook. And in a small way, just a small way, let go. Just let go. And in this is freedom. And a regressive quality comes up where scribbling becomes kind of fun. The result usually contains some kind of satisfying imagery to the maker, in that they're impulse gestures that are familiar to you. If you notice how you doodle, you'll see it's a familiar shape or something that it makes you feel comfortable or comforted. And adding some color really honors the work and the bravery to do something new. Other times I've used energy sketches to give perspective to the voices that we obey from within. I think this is still one of the ones from an energy sketch that was a double pager because she was thinking about in spatial interconnectedness. Now this was used as energy sketches where I was focusing on in the past, it was the inner critic. This is a group, the eating disordered groups have, this is touching on a really huge nerve, because who's more apparent in your life than that voice that is so mean to you, so incredibly mean. So the idea was to bring a little of that out and then make it into a pop-up, like a pop-up card sort of, to kind of alleviate some of the deep darkness of it. But what I've found is it's really difficult to go there. Both of these are sketches of mine over 2 different sessions. And so now I've started to use what I call the inner guide, which is the other voice, the other shoulder. If you picture it as the angel and the devil sort of thing, although they're both caring voices that you have inside yourself, and in some way they're always out of love. It's nice to nurture the inner guide. So to be able to have an inner sketch, talk about what words feel good to hear from others, but also from yourself, and then personalize that by bringing out a sketch of that and making it into a pop-up. Again, it's bringing it home that this is something that actually exists in some way within myself. And now I've externalized it, so you see a bit of it too. But more importantly is that you see that little aspect of yourself, perhaps in a little bit different light. Then I can take energy sketches even further, which is I'll do a session where we talk about doodling, and we talk about the merit of doodling. There are scientific studies that show that doodling can actually be physiologically helpful. And you can take it the next step. There's something called mind mapping, which is a great study tool in using doodle techniques, ideas anyway. So this is what I teach doodling techniques, which are in the day when there was a lot of pen and ink illustrative work being done. There are certain ways to create texture and so on that are quite interesting. And so what I do is I show 6 ideas, and we do a little workshop on that. And then people create an energy sketch and start using those techniques to fill in the blanks and or color, or even create with color from the beginning. What it does is add some visual interest and results in kind of a delight at the mastery of this drawing style. So it really develops some self-confidence and people have some fun. This is a whole interesting discussion of itself in terms of using your left hand and your right hand. So depending on which hand is your dominant hand, it's including the other one. In the discussion, we start off by thinking about both hands, and that when you were in school and you were learning to write or print, both hands were there for the lessons, as well as tying your shoes and playing tennis or whatever it was. But the other hand, in my case, my left hand, it doesn't get used half as much. And I know because sometimes my right hand's so darn sore. But the interesting thing is that when you use your non-dominant hand, you're creating more of a bridge between the 2 hemispheres of your brain, so that that creative side of you gets more of a mix with the other side, the left side, which is organized and mathematical and so on. And that's a really interesting exercise. So in this one, it was the same as I had showed earlier, the idea of mirroring the motion that one hand is creating, the other hand is following or doing at the same time. And you never know. These looked like alligators to the participant. But it doesn't matter. It's just that idea that there's no correct way to do this. And the non-dominant hand's results, they kind of evoke childhood memories of drawing. This is very unpredictable and very much challenges the need for perfection, as ultimately it's impossible because your non-dominant hand cannot be as exact. So experiencing the resulting freedom, it can be very grounding, and ultimately using both hands in this way allows for right brain expansion. So then I can follow up with that continuing idea of hands. This is a series of studies I'm going to show you around our hands as symbols for giving and receiving. So the discussion, first of all, I wanted to say that I use hands because they're kind of, well, they're very powerful and a big part of our lives, but they're also less volatile in the world of eating disorders to discuss hands as a way of acclimating to discussion about bodies and body shape and so on. I mean, it is upsetting sometimes. People trace their hands and the size of the tracing is not what they envision that their hand looks like, and that can be upsetting. But we usually can work through that. So the activity is to trace your hands and meditate on one side being the giving hand and one side being the receiving hand. Oh yeah, because the discussion ahead is around that. What does it feel like when you give something, when you hold open a door for someone, or help someone pick up their books that they dropped on the ground, or carry some groceries a little way for an old lady, that kind of thing. And then also, what's it like when someone does that for you, or gives you a gift of some sort? You know, it can be equally or perhaps more difficult to be on the receiving side. So by tracing our hands, we meditate on and you're invited to represent the feeling of such by showing what energies are surrounding those hands. An aspect of your body that you can be grateful about and thankful for your use is your hands. Some are upset, like I said, but push past. And then, your world experience extends beyond your body, and your hands are there, but not such a big deal. There's more. There's this energy of feeling and thinking that your hands facilitate that, but they aren't the beginning and the end of it. It's the energy that's really there. Another often used art modality is using magazine pictures in a collage, some kind of a collage discussion. So in here, we're dreaming new ideas. So in order to do that, what I usually give is a limit of 2 or maybe 3 magazines per person, and suggest that most images that they'll need will be within the pages. So then what I ask is that everyone open the magazines, and without, hopefully, it's hard to avoid reading the articles, but just to look at the pictures, and all the pictures that are of interest to you for something that creates some kind of a reaction, pull those pictures aside. And then when you've gone through the magazines, then what you do is you assemble the pictures in whatever way seems pleasing to you on the page of your, or 2 pages of your journal. And that's when you start to develop a bit of a narrative. If you've been able to hold yourself back during the searching time, then something else will come up during this arranging, that you'll see that there's a theme coming up, or something that you hadn't considered before. When you use the no judgment, this is what you notice. And then what we do is I ask everyone to take a look and see if they see what message is there. And I'll say, if you could give a voice to your piece, what does it wish to tell you? What notes can you make in response to that? You often, I think there's another one here, yeah. The images create a narrative that can surprise them. It can disturb them, but it can also inspire people. This one, you can see there's flames on this person's head, which represented anger. What's interesting is, you are able to reveal as much or as little as you like about the piece in any given session, but it is your communication. Yeah. This is a version of something that I usually do at the last session of a 10-week group, where I give everyone, in this case, 3-inch pieces of paper. I gave them 6 each, which they could use on one page or spread out like this. And then there are some magazines out and some watercolor paint. And again, it's a bit, I love energy sketches, can you tell? But what makes you feel good? What gives you joy? It's a difficult topic to discuss when you're framing your world in the shadows of an eating disorder, to think that there is such a thing as joy. So we do it gently in the discussion, going from feeling like gum on the sidewalk to leaping through tall trees is quite a variation. So a step in the direction is what we're talking about. And in this case, what we do is have that invitation out, and then everybody knows that if they would like, we'll share at the end with each other. So you create these squares, and then at the end, you decide how many of them must be kept for yourself, and the other ones are put in a hat, and then you can choose as many as you put in, you can take back out again. And, oh, right, before we do that, though, we have everybody do a bit of a processing of, this is what I've created, and this is what I see in it. And then when everybody pulls out of the hat, they already have a little bit of a narrative, knowing what the creator's intention was on the square. And then you bring in your own, of course, perception as well. And then there's still time left at the end to assemble them into a bit of a piece in your book, which then becomes what in Brilliant Things did I write about that? Emotions, yeah, there are emotions about parting with your own art and giving to someone else, and then receiving from others and displaying that in your journal. There's usually communal delight in the outcome, in the little gifts of art that you have from one another, and there's a collective bond sewn into this kind of sharing. So I wanted to say that art journaling really fosters experimenting with risk-taking and with intuition, because you're asked to trust yourself or to go with something based on how you're feeling. It fosters aspects of play, which can be very releasing, and letting go of control through the use of materials. And by learning techniques through the art invitations, you also feel that sense of self-efficacy and a little bit more confident. So you can certainly, through art journaling, feel better about yourself and pride in the creation that you've made. Every book, even if I were to look through your art journal, I wouldn't know what most of it meant, but I might be intrigued by the colors and the techniques you used. But for you, this is a very personal journey, and some pages people can't show to one another. If I see some of those confidential pages that are shown to me, I don't understand why they feel so vulnerable until and if they're explained to me. And often that's your information to know and yours to keep if you wish. Again, they can become useful tools, but only on a voluntary basis. So the group offers an opportunity to shift from isolation to socializing and practicing self-expression skills. It allows you to express without restriction, and you witness your own voice, which can be very surprising, and you witness the voice of others. And it isn't through sound; it's through images. My experience shows me that through art journaling, someone with an eating disorder can create a habit of self-exploration. They can act outside of what they thought were their limitations and reframe their beliefs to allow self-compassion and an opportunity to experience their feelings through art. So if you have questions, I have time now to field some. And also, if there's something more that you'd like to know about, feel free. There's my email address here and phone number if you wish. I'm happy to talk to you. I love talking about art journaling, as you may have been able to tell. And I'd be happy to answer more questions as you come along. And if you need some help now and know someone with an eating disorder, please send them to Sheena's Place. There's amazing programming there, and certainly the art studio and the art journaling is a great option. Thank you.
All right, so I'll just come in quickly while we wait in case anyone's typing out a question.
Okay, great.
To say thank you so much to Debbie for sharing your wisdom and your experience with us. I think those examples were amazing and a great visual to kind of pair with the dialogue around how to use those activities.
Great.
I do see some typing, so it looks like maybe someone has a question for us.
Okay.
For folks who are located outside of Ontario, just to clarify, Sheena's Place offers free group programming in Toronto. But if there are folks who do need supports outside of that location, you're welcome to call us at NEDIC, and we can help direct folks to services in their local area as well.
Yeah, good point.
All right, you do have a question here, so I'll pass it back over to you.
Hi, Lindsay. Lindsay's question is, can I expand on some examples of boundaries you would recommend in a group setting? Yes, thank you. There are set boundaries as well, but there are boundaries along the lines of not being late, being honoring everyone's commitment to being there on time, but especially your own. And boundaries of being there in a receptive as a way as possible, so that because if you're someone who likes to, for instance, share a lot verbally, this may be an opportunity for you to experiment with creating in a quieter way and allowing space for others, because conversely, there are individuals who are coming in that do not express themselves with much confidence, and we allow as much as we can an opportunity for that. Something that can happen within the art programming too is that having the visuals right there can be, as I mentioned, a bit triggering or disturbing, because things that you hadn't realized were so at the surface are coming out in your art. And that's why we do have art therapists there, because it's very helpful to have someone to discuss that with. I almost always have an art therapy student working beside me, so that there's someone to hold the room during creative time if someone else needs a bit of a timeout to discuss. Let me see, what are some of the other boundaries that there are? I don't try to put too much restriction on how to create or use the materials, other than flinging across the room or disturbing others sort of thing. But I do like to... There are certain topics that are not to be discussed, or, well, we won't necessarily know how you're depicting something, but certainly any discussion around food or fashion or exercise is not allowed in the room. And yeah, I'm trying to think of what else there is, but at the moment, I'm blanking. The training that's needed to become an art therapist is a postgraduate degree or diploma. So here in the in Ontario, there are several options you can do, but you get your undergraduate degree. It's nice to have some psychology, and if you haven't taken formal art lessons, that's okay, but you then must show that you understand how to use different and varying types of art materials through some kind of a portfolio. And then there are master's programs available through the University of Wilfrid Laurier after you get a diploma from the Toronto Art Therapy Institute. Or you can go to Carleton in Ottawa and get a degree, a master's degree in arts therapy, which includes specialty in art therapy. So I have a diploma from the Toronto Art Therapy Institute, which is the equivalent of a master's, but because we're such a small school, it's not recognized in the same way. But it is certainly recognized by the College of Psychotherapists of Ontario as a a type and a modality of psychotherapy that can be certified, which I am. Who funds Sheena's Place and your eating disorders work at Sheena's Place? Oh, Monique, that's great that you're finishing your diploma. Funding for Sheena's Place comes from private individuals and companies, many who've, I guess, had some experience or another, or their people have, and they bring it up as part of their corporate responsibility. So it's a really lovely thing. There are some fundraising events that happen in the city of Toronto, and in the Greater Toronto area, of course, to support it. There are people that commute from quite far to come and participate when they can. Yeah, so I see that Monique, Michelle Albert. Michelle's.
We do have someone else who submitting a question, which is great. It's great to have lots of discussion. Thank you, everyone, for participating and for being inquisitive. It's wonderful that you all came to listen to this session.
Yeah, it's great.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, because we still have a few more minutes. So if you've got a question, feel free to send it. Okay. So the question is, do you have any suggestions for art that can be used on a one-on-one basis? Which is what I do in my private practice in Toronto. It's rather than a group, but the way that I usually work it in my private practice is you are coming to me because you are feeling dissatisfied with the way life is going at any given moment, and you'd like to explore that. And my idea is to help you explore that by helping you find your inner wisdom so that it resonates with you and becomes something that you will reframe your outlook with. So if you come in and begin chatting with me, I will likely listen to what you're saying, and then I'll pull in, for instance, recently someone was discussing a dream they had about themselves as a little girl, and that I suggested that we explore that inner child that was very angry in the dream and wanted some attention. So then it becomes, however you wish to apply that, it becomes interesting to see. I lay out all the art materials on the table, and then people choose what feels appropriate for that feeling and for that day. And what comes out in the art then becomes a continuation of the narrative that perhaps the dream started or twigged because there's something else going on as a narrative within your life. And so that then becomes fodder. On occasion, when it's awkward or if it's the first time, my favorite request is to say, will you, we don't know each other very well, and I'd love to have a little bit more understanding of you. Would you mind drawing yourself or depicting yourself with paint, however you want to use it? What would you be like if you were a tree? And I don't necessarily mean, are you a maple tree or a pine tree, but it could be any tree. It could be a tree that doesn't exist anywhere else. It's just you. But think about the tree and what it's like, aspects of it, where it is, what the weather is, and then we go from there. And that really helps a person get used to the idea of thinking in metaphor, that who they are is not confined to just the body that they're in, that they're using at this time. It can be, you can be represented as an eagle in the sky or a puppet that you make, but it isn't your whole self, it's just an aspect of yourself. And so that can be an interesting exercise. Okay.
All right. There was a few thank yous from participants as well, Debbie.
Yeah, thank you.
Thanks again for sharing, and thanks again, everyone, for tuning in. Oh, I do see one additional person typing, so
okay.
So if there are additional comments, please send them. If anyone doesn't quite make it by the time we close the meeting, you're welcome to email myself or Debbie, and I can pass your questions on to her as well.
Yeah, that's great.
All right. Thanks, everyone. We're gonna end our meeting now, but have a great rest of your day.
I really enjoyed it. Thank you.